Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, third part there for the 23rd of June 2024. This is a Geopolitics video, and we're going to start today with the unfolding events in Dagestan, that region just towards Georgia, actually, in Russia. It has a very much a distinctive cultural identity there. There is an Islamic vibe to Dagestan, and the city of Derbent there has seen some terrorist activities by the looks of it. In the city of Derbent, unknown persons fired automatic weapons at a synagogue and a church, according to Russian media. According to preliminary information, one police officer was killed. Well, actually, no, that's 6 police officers killed, as far as I can work out now, and 12 people injured. The synagogue in Makhachkala was completely burned down. 3 policemen were already killed there. Shooting on the border of Russia and Abkhazia near the checkpoint of the Psu River. There are dead and wounded, says Mash here. So I think there are two things going on there. If we go to J in Kiev here, we have the idea that there's some activity just over the border from Georgia, maybe near the checkpoint there, and then over on the Caspian Sea there. Things really kicking off in southern Russia with simultaneous explosions and gunfights on both sides of Georgia. Not in Georgia, but in Russia over the border. Buildings burned, bodies in the streets. So there's some, pretty crazy footage coming out. Terrorist attack in Russia, says next. The footage shows shooting in Derbent, where attackers fired directly at people on the street. According to the regional interior ministry, 2 police officers were killed in the incident. Following the shooting, the perpetrators reportedly set fire to a local synagogue and an Orthodox church. Dagestan Telegram channels have published footage of the shootout. The specific city where the incident took place is not specified in the report. 2 attackers were killed in the incident. I can't show you that, obviously. So a lot of talk about this, a lot of chatter on the socials concerning these events. There's an awful lot of footage coming out as well of shootouts and the aftermath and fires and whatnot. Also, attackers were detained on the city beach of Makhachkala there. So you've got the police in the background detaining someone. There's chaos going on all around. So not as bad, it seems, as the Crocus City Hall incident. Don't know exactly who's behind this. There are obviously connections being made by the Russians already that the Ukrainians are behind this, and of course that's ostensibly nonsense, I would have thought. In Dagestan, Russia, unknown persons fired in a synagogue and church, shot policemen. Reports of shooting at a checkpoint in Makhachkala, and more and more of the same footage there. Now, here's an example of Russians blaming the Ukrainians and everyone else, MI6, the CIA, and their halls in the person of Krylo Budinov are trying to set fire to Dagestan. Of course, that's what's happening. Of course it is. Now, Anton Gerashchenko here says, well, actually, we'll go first to what he says here, which is it is reported that 2 sons of Magomed Omarov, the head of Dagestan's Sargokalinsky district, were involved in the attack at Makhachkala. Osman and Adil Omarov. Preliminarily, they were killed. Their father is a former policeman, according to Russian Telegram channel there. And this has caused Kadyrov to respond. Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen warlord. Kadyrov said that those who committed the terrorist attack in Dagestan, quote, have neither faith nor nation and are non-humans, quote, who must be eliminated on the spot. What happened looks like a despicable provocation and an attempt to sow discord between confessions, he said. Kadyrov is clearly concerned that this terrorist attack will draw the attention of the center not only to Dagestan but also to Chechnya, and heads will fly. So there you go. That's Kadyrov casting his opinion. There'll surely be some fallout to this, and of course Ukraine will naturally be blamed. As we've seen, Ukraine, CIA, MI6 are all fair game for the Russians. I wonder whether this kind of, because from a Ukrainian point of view, any kind of discord within Russia is going to be welcomed. Any discontent from subsections of Russian society will sow discord, disunity, and there will be political unease, and of course, all of that benefits Ukraine, you would have thought. Right, 2030 is the most realistic deadline for Ukraine's accession to the EU, according to the President of the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Association. This seems fairly sensible. I've said 2030 is the realistic date. Certainly they wouldn't see any kind of accession before 2030. That's your, I think, was it terminate ad quem, the earliest date you're going to get there. Zelensky has announced that 6 more participants have joined the Peace Summit communique this week. So if you remember, there was, 78, 77, some people are saying, but two dropped out, possibly 3. He's saying 6 have actually been added to the list. Now, they could be countries or organizations. He has announced, who had announced that Barbados and Marshall Islands had also added their names, or were 2 of the 6 who have added their names. But we don't know, as it says here in the Kyiv Independent, he did not specify the new countries or organizations that signed on. But that's good news. There are more supporters of that peace plan. Poland is considering complete closure of the border with Belarus. Quote, "We are now studying what consequences this will have for our economy and local communities," Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski said. Now, this will, I think, push Belarus further into isolation, and it might have an economic impact on Belarus. You then might hopefully you would see some discord in the Belarusian society, with people being upset about the direction of travel the country is set upon at the moment by their dictator leader Lukashenko. So there are these ongoing border issues between the two countries, or particularly coming from the east to trying to cross the border. Or actually, the report yesterday it's not there trying to cross the border so much as trying to cause issues at the border and attacking Polish border guards through the fences and whatnot. This has led to Poland just being pretty harsh there and saying, right, we're going to shut our border down with Belarus. And of course, there will be an economic implication to that for both sides, but I'm sure it'll hurt Belarus more than Poland, is my guess. Anyway, Euromaidan Press report that Polish President Duda has arrived in China for talks with Xi Jinping on Russia's war against Ukraine. So we've just had the Germans over there saying fairly robustly that, stop helping Russia, China, or else. I'm not quite sure what the or else will be. It's no secret that China's influence on Russia is significant. Presenting our perspective to Xi Jinping is of critical importance, said Duda. So anyway, he's there, had the red carpet rolled out. We'll hope that there is some impact of the Polish contingent being in China to advocate for a pro-Ukrainian point of view. Now, Ukraine and Slovenia are to sign a security pact next week. This will be Ukraine's 10th bilateral security agreement with NATO countries. I think there are more countries that have signed bilateral security agreements, but they're not all in NATO. That's really good news. So Slovenia are in that neck of the woods down, not quite the Balkans, but on the way to there. Lovely. I remember swimming in Lake Bled, as I've told you before. Beautiful. When I took my camper van, when I had one, down to my mate's place. He's got a backpackers in the Tatras Mountains, Slovakia, and me and my partner, we shot on down there before the boys were born, and did 15 countries in 3 weeks, because that's a beauty of Europe. You can just, I think one day we're like Austria, Italy, Croatia, just like something like that. It was fantastic. Anyway, Vietnam's foreign ministry called the US its strategic partner following Putin's visit, says Nexter. After Putin visited Vietnam, a US Assistant Secretary of State arrived and the next day and emphasized that relations with Vietnam, quote, have never been stronger. In response, Vietnamese foreign minister called the US a strategic partner, emphasizing the desire to cooperate in economy, security, trade, and all areas. This is some 4D chess going on here, with the US recognizing the challenge Russia are presenting when they go to countries like this. You've got the global south, you've got the Asia here, an Asian country that could be positioning themselves in the sphere of influence of both Russia and China, and America saying, hang on, don't forget us. So they'll be tussling over Vietnam there. Now, I reported the other day that there appears to be information that Russian saboteurs were behind the Deal motor fire that took place in Berlin the last month, I think it was. A Wall Street Journal here reporting that Russian saboteurs are behind the arson attack at the German factory. It was a bit of an odd decision to burn that factory because it was actually part of the Deal group, but it wasn't their defense manufacturing facility. It was to do with the automotive industry, and it could just be some bad intel. But nonetheless, this is tangible damage being done to German property in Germany as a result of Russian activity. How the Germans respond to this is it? I often think activity like this actually doesn't work in Russia's favor, especially when it doesn't actually harm the defense industry here. So you haven't affected the manufacturing of any stuff that might end up going to Ukraine. What you will do is annoy the German public there, those people who might be wavering, thinking, oh, do you know, the war in Ukraine, we've been provoking the whole kind of Nigel Farage Trump approach of, it's NATO expansionism, we're provoking blah, blah, blah. You'll be getting them to swing back and go, actually, no, screw you, Russia. You've been burning stuff on our soil. This, I think, will be counterproductive in the, not the information war, but in the war for narratives and influence. Right. Now, let's go back to Nigel Farage. A bit more to say on Nigel Farage today. Oh, goodness. So, as you know, he's the right-wing Reform UK leader and prospective MP for Clacton. He has been advocating, his positioning on things like immigration and small government, culture wars stuff, big on like anti-woke and all that. That's what he's campaigning on, and he's gathering quite a bit of momentum in a country that's massively disaffected with the Conservatives. Conservatives are super unpopular. I even saw, I live in a massively conservative area that will still, I live in Suella Bravermans. Actually, I don't technically, I do as a council boundary. I live in Suella Bravermans area, but I actually live in the constituency of Caroline Dinage. But both of those two constituencies will not go from being Conservatives. However, Novara Media, an avowedly left-wing media organisation, went around Fareham because Aaron Bastani, who's one of their guys, lives in Portsmouth, and he was doing some vox pops in Fareham. And there's a lot of people in places like Fareham who are really peed off with the Conservatives, but actually they're peed off because they say the Conservatives haven't gone right-wing enough. So it's weird that you've got the centrists getting annoyed that the Conservative Party have gone too right wing, but then you've got people who want them to be even more right wing getting annoyed that they haven't gone right wing enough, and in the end they've achieved very little. In fact, I was talking about this the other day, that empirical evidence suggests that if a centre right party tries to appease the further to the right by shifting the party rightwards like that, then the empirical evidence suggests that it doesn't do as well than if they just stood robustly in that centre-right positioning and repudiated that far-right rhetoric. And in fact, Peter Oborne, who's a former Spectator columnist and Telegraph writer, so he's a right-wing guy, he's saying that this is the death of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party died because they basically adopted the populist position and they've lost true conservatism. You can go back to Burke and is it Oakeshott and people like that, you know, true conservatives from way back yonder. They've lost the heart of true conservatism and they're going down this kind of populist route anyway. So that's where Nigel Farage is biting at the heels of the Conservative Party, or really kind of consuming part of the Conservative Party and advocating for all those things. But with that, almost unsurprisingly, because we've seen it with Marine Le Pen in France, we've seen it with the AfD, and we've seen it with Trump in the US, with that populist right apparently one of the checkboxes is you've got to be pro-Russian. Who knew? And he's trying to sell his kind of, it's NATO expansionism, it's the EU's fault, it's the West's fault, we provoke them. But it's still Putin's fault. It's Putin's fault, but it's our fault. It's Putin's fault, but it's our fault. And he's smashing these ideas together. I don't think he's presenting actually truly coherent. I mean, it's a wrong account of history. But he says it with such confidence that if you're watching, you didn't know any better, you'd be sucked along with that. And there will be people who don't know better who will be taken in by what he's saying. Anyway, you've got to start worrying if you're starting to pick up the kudos of Maria Zakharova. So Maria Zakharova is a Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's a terrible person in Russia, writing how wonderful Nigel is. Putin's press secretary praising Nigel Farage from her personal account, says Jay in Kiev. Actually, not press secretary. Director of the Department of Information and Press at the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Oh yeah, no shit. No, actually, that's technically I don't think she's a Minister of Foreign Affairs. She works in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as their press. So yeah, that's correct. Putin's only chance for survival is to get all these far-right idiots into power, says Jay in Kiev. Well, Nigel Farage says, I'm one of the few figures that have been consistent and honest about the war with Russia. Putin was wrong to invade a sovereign nation and the EU was wrong to expand eastward. The sooner we realise this, the closer we will be to ending the war and delivering peace. Maria Zakharova says, you are of course correct, Nigel, especially regarding NATO eastward expansion against an understanding reached in 1990. Of course, that understanding wasn't reached. That was one of the myths that they keep perpetuating. And Nigel Farage is sucking it up, and it's absolutely unacceptable. But anyway, so there's now this, huge fallout in the media, in the political landscape in the UK regarding Nigel Farage's positioning, because he's doubled down on it. So Tim White says, Nigel, I'm no friends of Russia. Farage can rely on support from his friends. Sorry, definitely not friends, and definitely not helping finance his political party. Sorry, Reform isn't a party, it's a company, so it doesn't reveal funding. Did I get that right? So what's interesting about Reform UK, and you've got to remember this, it's technically not a political party, and it's like a company, and so they don't have to reveal where they're getting their funding from. How interesting. So if we look at this Independent article, why Nigel Farage's Reform is a company and not a party, and what that means. So British political parties are traditionally formed as unincorporated associations composed of a membership rather than established as corporate entities. Rules are usually set out in written constitution, while party affairs are handled by a committee chosen by members like that of Labour or Conservatives. However, all political parties, including Reform, are required to register with the Electoral Commission and comply with obligations under the Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act 2000. Reform's co-deputy leader has previously said the structure allowed the organisation to cut through as an insurgent party without the possibility of factionalism, which can plague other parties. In other words, complete control. So as it is registered with the Electoral Commission, Reform UK is allowed to run for election like other major political parties on 4th of July, but with 115,000 paying supporters with no voting power to influence policy. Reform has admitted its structure might not be sustainable in the long term, something that could change after this year's election. I really would like to know, about their funding and about, where their money is coming from, and whether they are more able to cover up dubious funding sources. Actually, a little bit of clarity here from Left Foot Forward, really left-wing media source here, but they're saying that actually they are funded by climate science deniers, First Corporate, who are a consultant firm owned by Terence Mordaunt, director of the UK's leading climate science denial group, Global Warming Policy Foundation. That's at least where some of the money's coming from. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the issue at hand. What do we have here? So Tim White then later reports more on Traitor Farage, as he says, hashtag Traitor Farage and his dodgy party, scare quotes party. At least 3 more Reform election candidates have repeated Russia's disinformation and lies. If you are in the UK, vote for anyone, but don't vote for Putin. So this is Angela Carter-Begbie, who's standing in Queen's Park and Maida Vale, who said Putin wants peace. It's the West that don't. That Ukraine was horrible to the Russians first. Literally, these are the people standing for reform, or at least some of them, and that Putin put his people first. That is outright Russian propaganda. John Clark, standing in Bangor Aberconwy, that's in Wales, described Putin as sane and reasonable. He has also said supporting Ukraine was, quote, not in Britain's interests, and replied to Lord Cameron's support for Ukraine by saying, you are asset stripping our country to pay for your globalist friends to expand their empire. Hamish Haddow in Chipping Barnet falsely claimed Boris Johnson stopped the Ukraine peace talks on request by Joe Biden and said every Ukrainian death is firmly on Boris. And again, that's a debunked myth anyway, and certainly not a request by Joe Biden. Just nonsense. But that is what some reform candidates are saying. So I worry now that as reform are becoming more and more popular and they're gaining that momentum, they are now starting to more officially spread Russian propaganda. And we are seeing MAGA republicanism in a UK manifestation. And it is really, really worrying. And then the Daily Telegraph, interesting that the Peter Oborne interview I saw with Aaron Bastani, actually, it's fascinating on Novara Media, really, really good interview. But he was talking about how and he knows, like he works in that environment. He's a right-wing former Telegraph and Spectator editor or columnist, and he's saying these guys have gone populist. They have gone, some of the mainstream media in the UK, and this has been said about the Telegraph for some time actually, the change of ownership, but also how the press in the UK changed from actually Blair in 1997 and getting into bed with the Murdoch News Corp. So in 1996, Blair went out to Australia and had a meeting with News Corp, and you started seeing this very close work between the media and the ruling political parties. Cameron came along and didn't change that. And really kind of solidified that. Rebecca Brooks and all these people. Anyway, I won't go into it. But yeah, so we don't have a media ecosystem who hold the government to account enough, I think, particularly when it comes to most of our newspapers being right-wing, and if the administration is right-wing like the Conservatives, then they aren't held to account nearly enough. Anyway, here we have the Telegraph platforming Nigel Farage by him saying those views on BBC Newsnight the other night, and then saying, okay, do you want to let us know about these then? And then giving him a comment piece in the Telegraph. It's like, so you've got some Russian propaganda. Okay, do you want to just let even more people know about it? Yeah, we'll give you a page to do that. Oh, okay, just splurge. And then that's Russian propaganda. Yeah, freedom of speech, yeah, but you don't have to let someone say something that is damaging. You can say, yeah, you're free to say it, just not on my place, thanks. So this annoys me. So the West's errors in Ukraine have been catastrophic. I won't apologise for telling the truth, says Farage. Don't blame me for telling the truth about Putin's war in Ukraine. Facing up to the facts about the mistakes of the past has to be the first step towards a peaceful future we all want to see. In my BBC Panorama interview on Friday, Nick Robertson outrageously accused me of echoing Russian President Vladimir Putin's excuses for his invasion of Ukraine. That's exactly what, and he was correct to do so, because that's exactly what you've done. The political establishment has since been busy echoing that slur. And then he goes on to talk about it and try to justify his position again, and says later, and it's not only Ukraine, the West's diplomatic blunder over how to tackle Putin's mix of paranoia and assertiveness was just one of many disastrous interventions in the 2 decades since Tony Blair's Labour government joined the catastrophic invasion of Iraq, which I opposed. Now, what he's doing here, this is quite a clever thing, that he's using some controversial other military activities that we were involved in that were dubious, and then giving a false equivalence to Ukraine. So I would argue that Iraq was a pretty big problem, right? And I think it was an unjustified attack and so on and so forth. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. But he's saying, look what happened over here. That's what we're doing in Ukraine. It's like, oh, no, there's a really big difference between Iraq and Ukraine. There's a freaking gulf between, quite literally, between those two conflicts. And for you to give a false equivalence there is disingenuous, and at the very least. And he goes on to say, there is an issue of British democracy here too. The escalation of British support for the war in Ukraine has not even been an issue in this election campaign, since the old parties all agree with it. Am I, the leader of Reform UK, a party that is now running second in major polls, it's run second in one poll, not even allowed to question this political conformism? So he's saying, I mean, the reason why there's a conformity there is because it's so freaking obvious what the correct thing to do is and what the moral evaluation and political evaluation, what's happening in Ukraine. Well, that's why we've got unity across the parties, and that should be good. But no, you're saying, oh, look at these old parties just all agreeing with each other. Check me out. I'm new. I'm the new kid on the block, and I'm going against the tide here, and that makes me fresh and cool. And no, it makes you morally egregious in my books and politically egregious. But don't you start selling that as a positive. You are wrong here. You're just wrong with your interpretation of history. He says, my question for voters is this: who would you trust most to shape the future of UK foreign policy? Not you. He answers himself, me, who saw the disastrous wars in Ukraine and elsewhere coming down the line and repeatedly warned against them, or the establishment parties who helped to make them happen. So again, he's blaming Labour. In this case, he's blaming Labour and which is interesting because they haven't been in power since 2010, right? But he's blaming Labour and Conservatives, both helping to make the Ukraine war happen. This guy, anyway, so in the Telegraph, luckily there are some more sensible approaches, although I don't fully agree with what Hamish de Bretton Gordon says. He's a former tank commander. He contributes to the Ukraine the Latest podcast. He says Nigel Farage is simply wrong about Vladimir Putin. He says, it looks to me as if Nigel Farage and the Reform Party have just blown their chance to become a major voice in the British Parliament. The suggestion that the West provoked the tyrant in the Kremlin into launching his bloody war in Ukraine is utterly wrong-headed. I feel great frustration over Farage's comments. If he had said that our pathetically small army and lack of conventional defence meant that Putin thought he had the green light to invade Ukraine because we no longer care for our security and the defence of Europe, then I would have agreed with him enthusiastically, but he didn't say that. He goes on to say, I actually agree with a whole bunch of other things that Farage has said, and that means I cannot vote for a man who, however unintentionally, has almost certainly given Putin a ray of hope. The West must prevent a united front on this issue. Every time we hint at wavering, we strengthen Russia's resolve, giving it the sense that if it just holds on a little longer, Western support will wane, and the flow of ammunition will dry up and victory will be in sight. It's a self-inflicted wound, and all the more frustrating at that. For that. Absolutely right at the end there. This only helps Putin. Nigel Farage saying that and allowing or giving free rein to his party members or candidates in different constituencies to say similar or sometimes even more egregious things is only to the benefit of Putin. It's only to the benefit of Putin. Now, ABC News here, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, talks about the Nigel Farage defending Ukraine war comments after national backlash. At the end of their article I was reading earlier, it said this, and I don't know about this. I would like to find more evidence of this or more information about this. Mr. Farage suggested his party, if elected, would not support Ukraine in the war, distinguishing Reform UK from the old parties who all agree with it. I didn't get that. I presume they're getting that from his op-ed here, his comment piece here. But yeah, if Reform UK are against support for Ukraine, then my goodness, there's even more reason not to vote for them. And then Guardian expectadly has a piece talking about how senior Tories are lining up to denounce Nigel Farage's defence of Putin's war. They are, as a party, is basically splitting in two, and you're getting this kind of people who are getting attracted to the whole reform thing, leaving certainly looking to vote for reform rather than the Conservatives, and they're going through a bit of a splinter at the moment. It is looking like it's going to be a catastrophic election for them, as I've talked about before. But they are, at least the sensible politicians there, from Sunak to James Cleverly, are lining up to absolutely criticise Nigel Farage, and correctly. Moderate MPs, they're limiting damage and so on and so forth. So, this is still rumbling on in the UK. It's a major thing. Right, moving on though. Fantastic Bricks games. So the Bricks are holding their own equivalent of the Olympics. Here we have the wrestling comp did even better. So remember we had that swimming. Was it artistic swimming? That there was only one person on the podium because there's only one person taking part. Well, here, I mean, this is just silence going on here. Wrestling Comp did even better with no competitors. Lithuania's Andrius Mazejko got gold, but his coach said they didn't even go to Russia. Here's the awkward final. There it is. That's the final. No competitors. I mean, what an absolute embarrassment. Yeah, so that's the BRICS games for you. And then finally, just a bit of Russian disinformation here. Russian bots have begun flooding Facebook groups with AI-generated photos of, quote, beautiful and lovely Russia. However, there's a catch. Just take a look at these delightful faces. It's fascinating looking at stuff like this when you can flash past that and think, oh, yeah, Russia's lovely. Let's go to Russia. And then you think, oh, look at this. Oh, my goodness. Oh my goodness, what is going on here? And these AI generated photo or pictures can give some pretty hideous outputs. I mean, just goodness me, look at that. Look at what's going on there. It's all a bit weird, isn't it? But that's Russian bots and trolls for you, and AI at work. Anyway, that's enough for me. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon.